Hello, everyone. Welcome to Teaching with Magic, a podcast exploring the intersection of education, fantasy, and literacy. Here at Teaching with Magic, we explore the different ways that teachers in the fiction and in the real world make magic for their students. You'll hear discussions about teachers and teaching methods in fantasy, science fiction, and pop culture. You'll hear interviews with scholars in various fields about important topics in education, and you'll get to be a part of an ongoing conversation about why the imagination matters. Welcome to Teaching with Magic. Listeners, welcome back to the Teaching with Magic podcast. On the date of this recording, it is May 3rd, which means tomorrow is May the Force be with you. I'm talking to Kristi Riley, who has written on this Andor series and how that connects to abolitionist pedagogy. I'm really excited for this episode. So Kristi Riley is a PhD candidate in the Sociology program at the CUNY Graduate Center in New York City. Her studies focus on critical criminology, feminist theory, and popular culture. Her dissertation, currently titled Breaking Glass, Making Prison: How Carceral Feminism Shapes the Prison Nation, examines society's political, economic, and cultural investments in carcerality in many ways that are antithetical to feminist politics. She holds B.A.s in psychology and community studies from the University of California, Santa Cruz, a master's of science in conflict resolution from the University of Oregon Law School, and a master's of philosophy in sociology from the CUNY Graduate Center. Since joining the Graduate Center, she's held fellowships with Humanities New York and the GC Center for the Humanities. Before becoming a fellow with TLC, Kristi spent a decade working in criminal legal services, policy, research, and system reform. I first encountered Kristi's work on Visible Pedagogy, which is a blog site run by the Teaching and Learning Center at the CUNY Graduate Center. Visible Pedagogy is a blog dedicated to advancing and expanding conversations about teaching and learning at CUNY. The staff, contributing writers, and CUNY faculty, staff, and students collaboratively author the blog. Kristi's series analyzes the Star Wars Andor series from the lens of abolition and pedagogy, which is the study of educational practices as they relate to institutional racism, anti-slavery movements, and the prison industrial complex. Abolitionist pedagogy asks us to imagine and engage in pedagogical praxis beyond carceral logics of the current penal and criminal justice systems, as stated by Talisa Feliciano. Abolitionist pedagogy, broadly put, asks us to examine the systemic practices in education that reflect and directly lead to incarceration, from punitive no-tolerance practices to racist individuals and school cultures that actively put Black, Brown, immigrant, and queer children in prison. Kristi effectively argues that Andor is uniquely situated to criticize our current systems, but also cautions us to reflect on and improve our own practices so that we can develop pedagogical strategies that rely on, quote, trusted relationships and not threats of punishment. Kristi, welcome to Teaching with Magic.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. So excited to talk about Andor. Sorry that our timing for recording this on the 4th didn't work out because that would have been so cool.
That would have been, yeah. But hey, life happens as it happens. And sometimes even the force works against us.
Definitely.
Yes, it does.
Definitely.
So can you tell us a little more about your background and how you went from law to teaching? And what do you currently teach at CUNY?
Yeah. So I found my passion for teaching as like an undergrad. So instead of doing some type of senior thesis, my capstone was a student-directed seminar based on an internship that I did with an organization that provided in-reach and reentry services to people that were currently and formerly incarcerated and living in Santa Cruz County. And I just wanted to kind of share all the ways that my world and thinking had changed since finding out about the criminal legal system beyond what's represented on TV. And I've always kind of had, I don't know, one foot in some type of facilitation or teaching space. So I've been a TA. I've facilitated reentry classes. I've taught at CUNY, at the community college and graduate level, TA'd at NYU as well. Everything from like public policy, law and society, sociology, criminology. I really like working with I really like working with students and seeing that moment where education just like sets off a light bulb. I'm actually not currently teaching, so I'm trying to go pedal to the metal with finishing my dissertation. I might teach this next year. But yeah, this past year I actually haven't been teaching, which feels very, very odd.
Yeah. I mean, considering the fact that A, you're working on a dissertation, and B, you have a small child, I can imagine that, you know, that left a little, you need a little breathing room between then.
Yeah. I mean, I did teach her to like say dada and mama. So those felt like huge accomplishments.
There you go.
Working on our crawling milestones. So
yes, parenting is teaching, teaching is parenting at times. Yes. So understandable completely. So earlier I gave kind of a short, like clinical dictionary definition of what abolitionist pedagogy is. So then how would you define it in your own words? And how do you approach abolitionist pedagogy in your research?
Yeah, so I think it's important to start with what is abolition and its connection to the movements to abolish slavery and the movement to abolish the prison industrial complex. So I have a quote that I'm going to share by Mariam Kaba, who is amazing. Please check out her work, where she describes the prison industrial complex, or the PIC. So she says, PIC abolition is a political vision, a structural analysis of oppression, and a practical organizing strategy. While some people might think of abolition as a primarily negative project, let's tear everything down tomorrow and hope for the best, abolition is a vision of a restructured society in a world where we have everything we need: food, shelter, education, health, art, beauty, clean water, and more. Things that are foundational to our personal and community safety. And for me, abolition pedagogy is when my teaching practices in the classroom align with those values of abolitionist movements happening outside the classroom, the synthesizing of those two geographies and how I'm relating to people or thinking about things. When those align, that's when abolitionist pedagogy is in practice. So my research is like a little bit wonky in that, I mean, my passion is to talk about like popular culture, but my dissertation focuses on like gendered political economy of the criminal legal system. It looks at women's representation as professionals in the criminal legal system across all the different agencies, from law enforcement to legal counsel, courts, corrections, reentry. Because there's this argument out there that if we increase women's representation in certain roles, we can fix what's wrong with the criminal legal system. We have more women in law enforcement, it'll address issues that are issues of violence, or people not feeling safe or protected, or what police do in the community. If we have women in judges, they'll make different decisions. If we have women probation officers, that'll lead to different outcomes. And what I've actually found in the research is there isn't a whole lot to back that up. And it it relies on gender essentialist ideas of the work that women do, and inherently the work that men don't have to do. It relies on a binary of gender, and it tokenizes the reproductive labor, caregiving labor that women stereotypically, historically have done within the criminal legal system in a society that demonizes that in other parts of our world. So like we think about education, which is like under attack and completely underfunded. We think about reproductive labor in our welfare state or our lack of welfare state in the U.S. And it's so all that's being tokenized as a solution to the criminal legal system is not valued. And so exploring those contradictions, I'm able to surface kind of our reformed or new contemporary investments in the criminal legal system. Like post tough on crime and dealing with mass incarceration. So instead of like arguing in favor of gendered labor or fixing the system, I take an abolitionist approach and try to see how these inequalities, disparities, and lack of evidence show that we really need a different solution entirely.
Yeah. So to my understanding of abolitionist pedagogy, and I learned this from St. Angela Davis herself. I went to see her at Columbia one year. It was great. We shouldn't have the penal system at all, but bringing in, this kind of Band-Aid approach of, if we bring women into this carceral system as, reentry counselors, corrections officers, that'll help fix the system, when it's actually, no, we shouldn't have this this particular system at all. We should have a restorative system. We should have a system where, we're not sending people to prison as free labor, to boost our economy. Like, would that be an accurate, like, almost restatement of this concept you're researching?
Yeah, and like we definitely need multiple systems. We need multiple options.
Sure, yeah.
The criminal legal system primarily responds to instances of harm, injustice. Sometimes it's actually, a lot of times it's actually used to regulate certain behaviors, identify people as disposable. And there isn't a lot of healing or justice or safety involved in it, especially for the people who come into the system.
Right. It's sort of a revolving door of harm, and where culturally we see prison systems as a place of, okay, you're putting time out for a little while and then you're expected to go back into the real world and become a citizen again. But there's so many systems of inequality that will often lead people into the system in the first place.
Right. Yeah. Like the rates of people who have themselves experienced violence are so much higher for incarcerated people. Poverty is a huge driver, lack of access to supportive and quality education, housing, all of that acts as a funnel towards our system and then is exacerbated if and once people leave. And there's also a lot of trauma and violence that are inherent in how it operates.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that as we talk about the Narkina 5 prison complex. Holy cow.
Yeah.
So as I honestly was just Googling like teaching and pedagogy, and I found your post on TLC, and I was just blown away by your post on the Andor series and how it relates to abolitionist pedagogy. How did that come about? Like, what made you say, ooh, Andor, abolitionist pedagogy? I can see that. What brought you to those conclusions, and what gave you that idea to explore it as a critical reflection of education and how you teach?
I love Star Wars. And I think, it came up with talking to other people who also love Star Wars, but are abolitionists as well, just kind of texting with each other, being like, how did this get made? Like, it's a really great story. And if people haven't watched the series or Rogue One, which controversial.
I mean,
that is my favorite Star Wars movie.
fair.
You don't have to, it's both different and related to the traditional series about like Jedis and the Force. But this is a really great message, I think, right now about resistance and organizing and rebellion against imperialism and oppression. And so just kind of talking to people about how good the narratives and messaging was for the current moments that we're in. And I pitched it to the TLC's director, Luke, and he said, absolutely. And I turned it a draft for one blog, and he's like, this is a whole series. And I was originally thinking and reflecting back on lessons from the summer of 2020 uprisings and protests. And then like as the series developed, a lot of the connections to academia itself became much more literal. So like institutionally witnessing and kind of thinking about the contradictions with CUNY, the City University of New York as an institution. It's talked about as this engine of social mobility for the working class, for poor people, immigrants, people of color in New York. But it's also an institution that has deep investments and alliances with the carceral state and New York City's criminal legal system. And then I was also witnessing individuals within academia describe their values in politics and argue about radical theory in their analysis, but then observing their interactions with their fellow classmates, their students in ways that felt also contradictory, like there was a separation there.
Yeah, kind of talking the talk, but not really walking the walk.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's easy to not make those connections, or seeing academia and theory as separate from how we might act out in the world, but also like as teachers. And like I'd be at I remember being at a academic conference, and someone kicked off their presentation with a land acknowledgement, and then followed it up with a bunch of research and law that supported like expanding the criminal legal system. And it's like, what are we doing here? How do we have like, let's check in real quick, because these things aren't lining up. And I mean, there's a lot to critique about academia, but it also like there is something very special and magical and transformative about learning in ways that create more opportunities and freedoms and cognitively, but also out in the world. So those were kind of things I was mulling over. But then like as I've taken time to write the series over the course of my fellowship, we've seen universities really invest in the carceral state. So they've increasingly used police against their faculty and students, surveillance, punishment, especially against those who have been outspoken about Israel's genocide of Palestinian people. And so what originally was more like theoretical and behind the scenes has very much come to the forefront. But these dynamics have always been there, and education can reproduce and have alliances with our criminal legal system in ways that, if we're not thinking about it actively, just make them, pipelines or mirror images of each other.
Right, exactly. It's, there's education and there's like the desire to teach and to teach well, but it's also an institution that comes with its own institutional racism, its own systemic practices of punishment, as well as of learning. I mean, I started teaching in New York in I was, constantly coming, students were literally getting pushed out of our school because they were just getting suspended over and over and over again. And like, it just got me thinking about our suspension system and, 3 strikes, you're out kind of rule, no tolerance policies for bullying. But does anyone actually learn from that no tolerance policy? Like if I make a mistake, or if I bully someone, whether, intentionally or unintentionally, and someone says, nope, you're out, you're punished. What do I learn from that? Like, what do I, is that going to give me a motivation to try and be a better person? Or does that just simply leave me in the dust? And it's definitely a different story for me as a white woman that it is for a student of color. So thinking about all those things it's a very much in the forefront with Andor, as we have this fictional police state that was originally reflective of Nazi Germany. I mean, George Lucas has said in interviews that this is, I've got images of like Nazi Germany propaganda in my head as I'm creating the empire. So I think what I love most about Rogue One is that it's taken the fight from the Jedi and it's taken it from like, there's going to be one savior who's going to save us all, to no, this is by the people for the people. Like, this is Rogue One was like, nope, this is the movement that is getting the people to fight back against the empire. It's no longer in like the mythical heroes' hands.
Yeah, I mean, and like, that's what we can love about abolition too. Like, it takes everybody, it takes all of us. And when it's easy when someone has transgressed agreements or committed harm to just dispose of them. Like, that's easier for us than actually sitting with, okay, what do we owe each other when a wrong has occurred or there's a misunderstanding? Like, that takes a lot more work, and it's easier to just be like, okay, here's here's a punitive policy, and we're just going to standardize that. I mean, like, let's really think how ridiculous it is. The 3 strikes, like, that is a baseball rule.
It is.
And we
it's
just
a baseball
like,
rule.
uncritically apply it to our justice system. Like,
yeah.
If we stop and think about certain things that we just take for granted, that is ridiculous. So
yeah, a lot, actually.
And I'm glad you like brought up how explicitly political George Lucas has talked about that and his images of Nazis. Let's also not forget, Nazis based a lot of their stuff on the eugenics movement in the US. So like, this is us. This is the United States. This is our idea. Like, people say this isn't who we are. It absolutely
kind of is.
This is our history. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even our criminal justice system, I mean, I'm probably conflating some history a little bit, but I'm almost positive that our police system was based on the Pinkertons, which was a group of, citizen militia volunteers that were essentially, trying to quote unquote catch escaped enslaved persons who were fleeing their. I mean, I'm probably getting some of the facts wrong, but our police system is it's not, it was essentially a method for it's not a good history. It's not a good history.
Yeah, I'm trying to find we did some work in the at the TLC, like some internal labs talking about definitions of abolition, its connection to the prison industrial complex, its connection to slavery. And I'm trying to find the source that talked about different police sects. So like some in like in the South, a lot grew out of slave patrols, and then in the North they talked about, gosh, I'm totally messing this up and I'm trying to find.
I love source material.
Yeah, this is from this is a great book. This is from Prison by Any Other Name: The Harmful Consequences of Popular Reforms. So it says, policing emerged from the nation's history of civilian-based efforts to control and harm certain groups of people. So like in this, like, in the same way abolition takes everyday people, I mean, carceral forces also take everyday people, which I feel like Andor touches on really well.
Oh, for sure.
So many Southern police departments started as slave patrols during the antebellum years. Volunteers served on the patrols to capture enslaved people who had escaped or were perceived as trying to flee. In the American North, community members were often expected to serve on night watches, other early forerunners of what would become American police. So yes, what you said, I think, is very on point.
So in the second post of this series, you talk about Cassian's path through the rebellion. So specifically about Cassian and how he transforms from this individual fighting for himself and his own survival to this symbol of the greater galactic rebellion. So then how does Cassian's journey reflect our journey to, as you put it, political and intellectual radicalization?
Yeah. So, I mean, academia can be very isolating and competitive. I mean, I'm speaking about academia. It might apply to K through 12. I have not taught in those spaces.
Right.
But it can be, we're very much like socialized to see it as an individual experience, especially when you're struggling to survive outside of the classroom. You know, I'm here to take care of myself, to do what's asked of me because I have other things going on. And that is very much legitimate for people's reality. So our default is to shut down, buckle down, and just focus on ourselves. And we see that with Cassian in the beginning. You know, he's just trying to get himself free in the way that he's thinking about it. And as and all around him, you know, the universe is becoming more and more imperial, carceral, but he's focused on being able to move freely as an individual. And it takes a lot of unlearning, I would say, to see education as a collective process. There are power dynamics as the instructor, and the instructor has with their students, where it can kind of be like one way. I'm giving you knowledge. I want you to memorize as much as possible and then regurgitate so I can assess that you've learned what I've taught you, versus how are we exploring this together? How are we learning with and from each other? I think the instructor definitely has a certain obligation in terms of like experience facilitation, experiential knowledge. But I learn from my students all the time. Like I remember facilitating something about C. Wright Mills, which I was thinking about is like super critical. And we just, like, the responses students were giving, it just wasn't connecting, or I wasn't understanding what they were saying. And then all of a sudden I got it, like, oh, even though I had learned about, I think it was The Power of Lead, as like an amazing work that was really critical of our institutions, they were still seeing how it's operating within our given system and had an even further critique that just like blew my mind when I realized what they were talking about. So back to Cassian. I mean, as he's forced into situations where he's working with other people and he's relying on them, his world opens up in terms of, you know, what freedom looks like, what his future looks like, what the possibilities are for escaping the empire. You know, it's not just being able to evade them temporarily, but actually exist in the world with other people too.
Right.
And in the best of circumstances, you know, education is liberating and provides those options for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that Cassian, you know, he goes from, we originally saw him in Rogue One as this symbol of the, you know, the layman in the rebellion. You know, we are so used to, you know, we've got Padme, we've got, we've got Luke Skywalker, we've got Leia, you know, all these people that are sort of up in this pedestal almost. But then you've got Jyn Erso and you've got Cassian Andor as these lay people who are actually doing the grunt work of getting down in the dirt, spying on people, and spying on the Empire, getting the plans from the of the Death Star to the rebellion into the rebellion before it even gets to the fight on Yavin. It's who are the grunt everyday people who are doing this work, and we see Cassian and Jyn as these people. And so how do we get there? How do we get to a rebellion space?
And I think like when we meet him in Rogue One, I never would have imagined the Andor journey,
right?
Because like you see him in Rogue One, he is fully committed to the rebellion, and he is so confident and seems like, I mean, just has like a fully formed politic and is ready to do whatever it takes. And Andor takes us back to when he was completely disengaged. And I think one of the things that spoke to me as a teacher is like not giving up on people's potential. A lot of people's politics and intellectual like radicalization happens over a long journey. And it happens after a concerted effort by the existing system to miseducate people on what's possible. What is freedom? What does freedom look like? And so when students are coming into your class, like we're meeting them at a certain point in their journey as CUNY has like non-traditional and older students, but a lot of them is like young adults. Early on in that journey, early on in their critical thinking, not thinking to pass a standardized test, but actually thinking to grow. So I don't know, there was something really special about that and humbling and a reminder about people's potential that I think we see in Cassian's.
Absolutely. I mean, especially as he's coming from this journey of I have to live for myself and fight for myself, to now I see a system I've learned from the other people that I've worked with, the situation in Aldhani, and getting roped in with Luthen, and having to go from that and escaping it to now I am in the system. I am in the system as not only as a prisoner, but also as someone who is part of this giant policy that is created in order to create labor for this Death Star that we're building. Like we don't know exactly, we don't know that at the time, but we can kind of assume that, that what was it called? The prison reform, they had a legal name for it. There was an initiative that was passed through the Senate, and it trickled down and it came to Narkina 5. And Narkina 5 was one of those prisoners that they were creating this labor force to, like, the more prisoners, longer sentences, staying in prison, that means more labor, more free labor to build this Death Star. Or whatever it is that they were building for. I'm assuming it's the Death Star. It could have been a TIE fighter for all I know. So he's starting to see how he's this cog. While he's a cog in the wheel, which cog does he want to be, and does he want to continue fighting for himself, or towards the end when he sees Luthen again, he says, "You're either going to kill me or take me in. So which one is it going to be?" As a follow-up, I'm constantly wondering, why is it easier for us to examine and criticize, in this case, the Empire, but like other fictional, like dictatorships, in literature and in popular culture? Why is it easier for us to examine and criticize these than it is for us to make changes within our current realities, whether it's our current institutions or the criminal justice system as a whole?
I mean, it's a really big bureaucracy, and I think some of the most impactful work is really boring. but also the criminal legal system has one of the best popular culture propaganda machines out there.
Mhm.
So most of what people think they know about the system, or what's reflected or told in stories of everything from, television to movies, um, is itself a fiction.
Yeah.
So when we see some very literal representation in like fantasy pieces, we don't necessarily identify that with our system because of its amazing propaganda or what Law and Order taught us, or I mean, how many shows on TV have something to do with some type of law enforcement agency, or prisons or things like that. Also, the narratives put out there about what it does for victims. Like, there are a huge amount of cases that aren't solved,
Hmm.
or yeah, that aren't solved, or like if you've been harmed, accessing services means being part of, or means you have to have like an active case in the system, or that the way that our system operates brings resolution or feelings of peace or makes things right. And sometimes terrible things happen, and there's not necessarily a way that make something that'd make that okay.
Yeah.
However, we can decide as a society to respond differently so that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
So yeah, how like I think it's easier to respond with imagination, with things like Star Wars because it's fantasy. So like anything's on the table. And we have a better, clearer vision of that than our own system.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
I was watching the first episode of the second season, and I kind of giggled a little bit. I mean, in sort of an ironic way, I won't lie, but it was the there's a sort of a think tank, Krennic, Imperial person Krennic, got a think tank of people in the Empire together to try and figure out how to um, how to essentially colonize this planet so that it can get out of the way, because I think they either need a resource that's within the planet's core, and they have to
Mhm.
figure out literally how to displace the entire planet's population. And the
Mhm.
first thing that happens is these two media specialists, these two propaganda specialists, just stand up and start talking about this media and propaganda campaign that they're going to launch, essentially smearing the people of this planet
Mhm.
and bad mouthing them. And I'm like,
Mhm.
dear God, that's social media. That is social media in a nutshell right there. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. It was just they just stood up proudly. We're like, yep, these are the things we're going to say about this planet and about their people and how gross they are. And and that will immediately get everybody to vacate the planet, and they won't have resources anymore. They won't have an economy anymore because we're just going to verbally destroy them. And I'm like,
Mhm.
no, no, this is scary. This is very scary.
Mhm.
But I can see that reflection because of this show. Like I can because the show put it that way and said, this is what we're doing to this fictional planet. I can also see them doing the same thing with the Israeli genocide of Palestine. I'm able
Mhm.
to kind of make those connections and go, oh, so that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how they're doing it. So this is what I'm seeing online, and this is what I'm seeing on TikTok and social media. Kind of, it's a little scary at times and really humbling to see this on TV, and then you're like, oh wait, this is actually happening in real life.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, it's one of those, like, when it clicks or you're able to make the connections, it's one of those things where, like, I'll turn to someone and just say, how is this made? Like, how did this get past someone? Is there someone
Yes.
working at Disney who's like a radical revolutionary that we just don't know? Like, am I missing something?
Right.
But I think the messaging and critiques of Empire in Andor and Star Wars are so helpful and meaningful for our current our current moment.
Absolutely. Especially like to bring it back to the Narkina 5 Imperial Prison Complex. I mean, that is a fascinating critique of the American prison system, if not other nations' prison systems. So what did you notice about those episodes? And conversely, how are Cassian and Kino Loy? Like, I was really fascinated with Andy Serkis's character, Kino Loy. How's
Oh,
that?
yeah.
How is that reflective of our complicity in the American justice system and how the American justice system works?
I think I think one of the things that was really obvious for me is it speaks to how our complicity in making or viewing people as disposable.
Mm-hmm.
And we see the prisoners like humanity and potential as they come together and they organize and they resist. Um, uh, but yeah, like the institution itself and how it operates, and the fact that the goal is for no one to get out ever,
Yeah.
to exploit their labor to serve empire. I think speaks to our revolving door, or the fact that we'll lock people away uh, rather than figure out um, alternative means of keeping people in communities safe, or addressing harms that occurred, and developing like uh, alternative methods of like reintegration and support for both the people that have been harmed and the people that committed those harms.
Yeah.
One of the narratives um, that's pushed by people against abolition, so like to discredit abolition, is that it's this privileged white utopic philosophy that's completely detached from reality. And we saw officials in Atlanta use this narrative when people in Atlanta started to resist the building of Cop City. Officials were like, oh, these are outside privileged white people who have no idea what it's like to live in Atlanta. And that can't be further from the truth. And we see in Andor, in the history of the abolition of slavery and the movement to abolish the prison industrial complex, that people at the heart of these systems who are targeted by them, enslaved Black people, political prisoners, immigrants today, like, are at the forefront of resisting those systems.
Mm-hmm.
So we see people in Narkina 5 come together and organize and realize like it's on them. And the way they communicate, the way that they organize, that they both find ways to resist their forced work and find meaning in it coming together. I think has a lot of parallels to what we see in our real world. Like recently, I don't know if you saw like on the internet or it went viral, prisoners or people that were imprisoned in, what is it, like a Bluebonnet facility in Texas formed an SOS.
Oh, wow.
To like get and that was picked up by like a drone outside, but they're communicating despite like this institution doing everything possible to cut off those communications.
Yeah. It's amazing.
We see like in the tensions of finding meaning in your work, and knowing that work is super exploited and relying on essentially enslaved labor. We see that with incarcerated firefighters, especially like I'm originally from California, and I am so thankful for the attention that got in the Palisades fire, in the fires that happened in Altadena, and how people became aware of the conditions or the fact that like incarcerated people are doing that work. And what does it say that that's our system? I wouldn't want those gentlemen and women to like go back to a normal jail. I also don't want us to expand our investment in having incarcerated firefighters, what that should teach us is that these people have investments in our community. They're a part of our community. And if they're out there doing this incredible work, it's likely that they could be out there in the community without the criminal legal system involved.
Right.
And then just one last example, I heard on an interview on, I think it was Pod Save America, with a woman who had been incarcerated briefly related to like immigration issues, and how her privileges and support helped her get out, but there was also a lot of organizing on the inside of the women that she was incarcerated with, like trading phone calls, saying, can you contact this person, getting messages out, so that not only, she'd be able to get her freedom, but she's also bringing attention to the other women who she left behind.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that is evidence, I think, of the profound potential in people's humanity that we just dispose of when we rely on systems of incarceration and punishment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what really stuck out to me with Kino Loy was that he had such faith that in this system, as a prisoner, like for whatever reason he ended up there, he had a place of privilege in the system. He was he was the manager, and he knew that if he just kept his head down and did his work, he would be released one day, until they realized, no, nobody's getting out. They're just, they release prisoners and then find a way to bring them back in. And then, as soon as they realized they made a mistake and put him in the wrong, this prisoner in the wrong cell, they decimated the entire population in that floor. And so I think once he realized just how complicit he, for Cassian, it was always about getting out. It was always about resisting and getting out, not just keeping his head down and fulfilling his sentence. But for Kino, it was, if I just keep my head down and I do what I'm supposed to do and I follow the rules, my time will be up, I'll get it done, and I'll be fine. But what really struck it for him was when he realized that he was just this cog in the system that nobody cared about. It wasn't about the rules. It was about the, it was about the end goal of creating and putting together these parts for the empire of this free labor force. And it isn't until he gets that news from the medic, and when Olaf has a stroke, that he finally says, this is how many guards there are on the floor. There's no more than 12. Like that's the moment for him that he starts to be a part of the rebellion. It's oof.
Yeah, I mean, and these systems rely on these intermediaries, right? People that are maybe adversely impacted, but somehow also still believe in the system. I mean, because that's what we're taught from a very, very young age, that this is just the way things are.
Right.
And one of the things Abolition asks of us is to imagine something different, like what if? So,
and it's, what if, it's a beautiful phrase, and especially, when thinking about, writing fantasy, it's literally like, what if carpets could fly? Or what if, what if we had a stick that, transforms, a pretty dress, a bunch of rags into a pretty dress? What if we had a different way of, what if we had different funding, we put our funding towards housing and other systems of restoration rather than incarceration and punishment? What if we had different policies? And I think that was the moment for me when I saw Angela Davis, of like you said, I had this notion of what the criminal justice system was. You break the rules, you go to, if you break the rules, you go to jail. If you don't break the rules, you're fine. If you don't break the rules, you're fine. But I could get away with that as a white person. However, other people in my community perhaps cannot. And these systems are built on Black and brown labor, and are built on Black and brown imprisonment. And so even just trying to unlearn that in itself, is a challenge. But I'm really grateful for Star Wars and for Andor and for theorists and activists, even like Bettina Love, like Angela Davis, who talk about these things as they are in the real world, so we can make these connections.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in your post, you caution against keeping these concepts of freedom kind of within the ivory tower. You talked about like, okay, this is, we're talking about it, it's theory, but we're teaching freedom in theory, but we also have to bring it out into the real world as well. We have to practice it. So what are some of the ways that we teachers in the real world can practice abolitionist pedagogy? What does that look like? And whether that's in a day-to-day basis in our classrooms or as part of a larger institution, whether administrators or deans or, those of us who are kind of creating those rules and systems.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the biggest thing is to remember that like abolitionist pedagogy is connected to abolitionist values of abolishing the prison industrial complex, that synthesizing those praxes. In doing so, we make a world where the PIC is impossible, and that world provides a better environment, and better relationships for learning as well. So if like certain pedagogical praxes are someone's introduction or first experimenting with abolitionist philosophy, like awesome, welcome, let's do this, that's great. But it should be connected to abolition outside of the classroom. Like it's great if you abandon zero tolerance policies, but if you're supporting like hotspot policing or the three strikes policy outside of the classroom, like then I don't necessarily see the classroom practices as abolitionists.
Right.
But there are certain things that when we're bringing how we exist in the classroom in line with how we want to exist in the political world outside of the classroom, is seeing those geographies as connected. There are just things that make more sense because they're aligned with those political values. So yeah, I talk about like AI and plagiarism. So like AI technology.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, like the fear, I think, by the institutions is students are going to use AI to plagiarize. And so, we as educators need to use AI to like catch them plagiarizing. And it's like, what?
Make that make sense.
Yeah, especially like when the technology is built on like theft of people's intellectual property, misinformation, and it alienates both educators and students from critical thinking. It's damaging to the environment. Like there are a lot of reasons to not use it. So one approach that I take is talking about academic integrity as an almost know your rights campaign. So like if I'm given the option, I don't use plagiarism detection software. I have conversations with my students about that decision and what I'm looking for in their in our time together and why I don't want them to use it. Acknowledging certain pressures that they might be under where they feel like they need to, or I mean, some people, there are educators who are encouraging students to use it, who think that there's an ethical use of it. And so like what's normative in another person's classroom might not be how I want to approach learning. And just having like a blanket policy where if I catch you, there's a punishment, alienates us from each other and then from their learning experience.
Yeah.
And I think it's like academic integrity is important. Citations are important. and understanding consequences in the classroom, but then outside in like other people's classrooms, I feel like is an important learning moment too. So where I might have a conversation, because it happens, like you catch people even without software. For me, that's a conversation with my students, and understanding what happened, what's their understanding of the situation, why they decided to do certain things. And then we make a decision from there about, okay, going forward, here are my expectations and how can I support you? How do we rectify, the transgression with this assignment? And those are preferences for addressing like harm within abolition, like outside of the classroom. And it makes sense that like I would be consistent with my interactions with people inside of the classroom as well.
Yeah. So with the AI, I mean, the AI question is, you're talking about, yes, you're talking about intellectual property, but we're also, these are also human students who, and as you said, many of them are working adults. So AI is a time saver in a sense, or like for some of the students that I work with who are dyslexic, it's because they really struggle with reading and their brains literally struggle with reading and writing. So AI is a quick way to either get or copy down information, but I still have to teach them that the server that you're using, is pulling from Google's most commonly searched sites. It doesn't mean that it's accurate. You still have to put in the work of evaluating the source and deciding, is this the right source for my paper? And so, having that conversation with them and, letting them know that, yes, AI isn't great for the environment. And, here's what happens if you do it without telling me, or if you really feel the need to use AI, why are you using AI? Is it because you don't have the right word? Here's another tool for you. Is it because, you're under strain, under pressure? Okay, I'll give you an extension. I still have to submit your report card comments to the principal by X date. So let's see what we can do about getting, those assignments in on time. And so it's, what are these practices that we can also emulate in the real and political world, as you say? Can we think about like, okay, why, like I remember getting into an argument once with someone who I noticed a newspaper article, I reposted it on social media, and it said, we're creating classrooms within the prison system so that, people can, people can learn and they can, get GED credit so that they can become members of the workforce. And someone online said, no, I don't want my tax dollars going there. That's not where I want my tax dollars to go. They did something wrong, so we have to punish them. I'm not going to use my tax dollars to, get them out of this punishment. And I'm just thinking to myself, so you would rather spend more tax dollars keeping these people in prison rather than funding their education so that hopefully they never go to prison again?
Right. I mean, and if we had robust social services, if we invested more in education, prior to people or like outside of prisons, like that argument falls apart.
It does.
One of the inequalities of like capitalism and the system, the criminal legal system relies on, is like fairness. Well, it's not fair that they have that. It's like, well, shouldn't we? One, we should all have it. Two, they should have had it before they got there.
Exactly.
And like, I mean, yes, education education for people that are incarcerated has so many benefits that helps them get out and stay out of the system. But also, like, I think I said this earlier, education is meaningful, period. Yes. It's something like that it is a part, especially like what we're introduced to in college courses, like thinking critically and differently from how maybe we were raised in like our hometown. Like there's so much value in the classroom that everybody deserves, no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, part of the reason why we have, we have an illiteracy crisis. I mean, sorry, I come from a reading specialist point of view. I'm a dyslexia educator. So I have talked so many times about like the history of teaching reading and the fact that we've been teaching reading wrong for over 20 years. And that is why we have an illiteracy crisis in America. And that's why there are so many people who are currently, incarcerated. Part of the reason is because they can't read beyond a fourth grade education, a fourth grade level, and so shenanigans ensue. And so if you if you're unable to read, if you weren't taught how to read, that shuts so many doors for you as a human being. Like you can't can you read a contract for the labor that you're about to do? Maybe not. Are you able to get the medication that you need from the pharmacy, or even read the bottle and keep yourself, make sure that you're taking the correct dosage so you don't hurt you? I mean, yes, that is a soapbox I've stood on many a time. So education, while it's still, yes, it's an institution and there are some practices and many systems that are reflective and directly related to our penal system, we also need education and education practices that will uplift our students and teach them how to critically think and teach them. And it just, I don't know where I was going with that.
No, I mean, I'll join you on this. Like, I'll join you on the soapbox. I mean, we're talking about, fantasy and the things that it inspires in our imagination. Like, imagine the books. Like, I mean, there's a bunch of Star Wars books, those not being available to think differently or introduce new ideas. Reading is important. And like, if students have disabilities or additional needs, to the extent that they're comfortable sharing that with me, it's possible to be collaborators in developing different solutions. So like, are there resources on campus? Okay, I can absolutely give you an extension if you want to meet with a tutor. When I'm reading when I'm reading whatever they've submitted, I'm not necessarily penalizing them for things like grammar or spelling. I mean, I'm a terrible speller, but like grammar, especially for like at CUNY, there's a lot of students where English is like their second, third, or fourth language.
Yeah.
And so what they're submitting is actually incredible. And so finding ways to understand their individual journey through education and how to support them is an important part of like my pedagogy. So yeah, not punishing them for kind of these things that might be arbitrary, when the core is their critical thinking, their development, like bigger ideas. I want to help foster those.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I've been familiar with abolitionist pedagogy for a while, but for those in the audience who have never heard of it before, or who want to learn more after hearing this podcast, which resources would you recommend for teachers who do want to understand more about abolitionist pedagogy, or even people who aren't teachers and want to learn more about the how to be good abolitionists? And
we're all flawed abolitionists,
right? Sure, but
yeah.
What resources would you recommend?
An organization that I really respect and admired and has taught me so much is Critical Resistance, and they have a page on their website called Abolitionist Educators Work Groups, and they have stuff for K through 12 educators, educators in higher ed, community and public educators. They have brief videos and written pieces and toolkits and worksheets, podcasts, whatever your preferred or desired medium is, there's some options there. So I really recommend I really recommend their resources.
Awesome. How about, who are some of your favorite abolitionist theorists? Like, I talk about Angela Davis a lot. I love Angela Davis. Are there others that you would recommend that we could go to for like sort of the primary source, or others that you can think of off the top of your head?
I mean, a lot of them are affiliated with critical resistance.
There you go.
I mean, I love Ruth Wilson Gilmore. It's amazing. Dylan Rodriguez is great. I'm pretty sure there's a Millennials Are Killing Capitalism podcast with Dylan Rodriguez. I'm pretty sure that's where it was that I really liked. I can follow up over email, track that down. I mean, Angela Davis, I say this like in, I think the first or the second piece, but like seeing her speak changed my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, recommend her. Mariam Kaba is really amazing. Victoria Law and Maya Schwenwar. I mentioned their book earlier. That's where the quote that I pulled about police being from like slave patrols and neighborhood watches. Kelly Hayes is great. Yeah, there's so many people that I haven't read. Like, I'm discovering new people all the time and talking with other people as well. So
absolutely. Yeah. We're constantly learning. Teaching doesn't mean the end of learning. Teaching means you're continuing to learn. So absolutely.
Oh, and Scallywag is a platform they do specific work with people who are incarcerated as well, and so they get to have a platform. So I really recommend reading people who have been, or I mean, are incarcerated now, have been incarcerated, and their insights and contributions to abolition as well.
Wonderful. Definitely. We'll check them. I'll have them available in the show notes for sure, for anyone who wants to check them out. And I'm sure I'm terrible at social media posting, but I'll bring those resources to the forefront too. So do you have any projects or upcoming publications that you'd like to share with our audience? What's going on in your academic career?
I mean, I'm trying to finish this dissertation, and I don't have anything coming. I have things like under review, so they could either come out within the next couple of months, a year from now, or sent back to me and I have to revise them. So I'm in I don't have anything exciting. I mean, the fourth and final installment of my Andor series will probably come out in the fall. The TLC, the Teaching and Learning Center at the CUNY Graduate Center, which is where my fellowship is and why I wrote this Flex piece, is always coming out with really amazing work from, honestly, just the best group of people who care very deeply about pedagogy and social justice. And so, yeah, check out TLC resources.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kristi. This was such a great conversation, and I'm really excited that I got to talk to you about Star Wars and Andor. And especially Prussia, now that we have the second season coming out, so we'll get to see more Cassian, more Resistance, and do you think you'll be able to expand the blog a little bit more with the second season coming out?
Ooh. Probably. I mean, with probably the fourth and final installment will be on the second season. I've watched a few of the episodes that are out. I think it's so good. And there's this very explicit moment in the first episode where Cassian's collaborating with someone and she asks him, she's so scared and she's like, is it worth it? And he's like, this moment right now, when you decided to do something different, when you've that's what makes it worth it. And I feel like that says everything about teaching. When students realize another world is possible, it makes it all worth it. Yeah.
That is it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That was, oh, I think I cried a little at that moment. I'm not gonna lie.
yeah,
It was
I
great.
got goosebumps now. Like just recall, it's just like it's so explicitly clear and applicable. And I know other people have been inspired by their social justice praxis too. So it's really cool to see the different ways that it's resonating with educators and people who are politically involved. So
Yeah. That's the beauty of Star Wars. It really holds up a mirror and encourages us to think and to act.
mhm.
So I will say for now, may the 4th be with you, Kristi, and thank you
And
so
also
much.
with you.
You were also a lapsed Catholic. Well, I'm a lapsed Catholic. I'm making assumptions.
I was raised Catholic. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's the automatic response for those of us who were raised Catholic. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks again.
Thank you. This is great.
Listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to hit the subscribe button on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or your other favorite podcast feeds. If you enjoyed listening, please leave a rating and a review as well. You can read and find out more about Teaching with Magic by visiting our website, teachingwithmagic.blog. You can leave a message on our podcast page, read past Teaching with Magic posts, and check out our book lists on our affiliate page. We also invite you to support us on Patreon. You'll have access to bonus material, our Discord channel, live Q&As, and you'll get a sneak peek at future products such as lesson plans, worksheets, and other teaching tools. The link is always available in our show notes and the podcast page on our website. Thanks again for joining us, and as always, keep making magic.